Hey Momentum Youth, it's Bekka. I'm excited that I get to share with you tonight, so let's open our Bibles to Luke chapter 19. In the first few verses, we're introduced to a man named Zacchaeus, and we learn from the following verses that Zacchaeus was a tax collector. It meant that his job involved cooperating with the Roman government who was oppressing those people in order to collect the taxes. But the problem with that is not only were tax collectors seen as traitors, they were also known as scam artists because they would save some of the money for themselves. So we know, because of his occupation, that Zacchaeus was someone who probably didn't have a lot of friends and definitely was not respected or well-liked in his community. We also know from the verses that Zacchaeus was extremely short. I can relate to Zacchaeus. If you've ever been at a concert and 5 foot tall, you know that all of those tall people find a way right in front of you. So if you want to be able to see and be a part of what's going on, and most importantly, be seen, you need to get creative. And that's exactly what Zacchaeus did. So instead of trying to fight his way through the crowd, he climbed a nearby tree and he put himself in a position that Jesus would have to see him. And Zacchaeus' plan worked. Jesus immediately saw him and invited himself to dinner at Zacchaeus' house. The other people judged Jesus for picking a known sinner over them. Because you see, Zacchaeus wasn't like the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders of that time. They obeyed the law, they followed everything that they were supposed to do, but they always missed the heart behind it. Now, there are no verses in the Bible that explicitly tell us why Zacchaeus was looking to meet Jesus that day. But we do know a few things. We know that Zacchaeus' reputation as someone who was a scam artist and cheating the people wasn't a secret. Everybody knew what a tax collector was doing. And Zacchaeus' reputation also wasn't a secret to Zacchaeus. He knew what people thought of him. He probably didn't have a lot of friends. And he also probably had a really lonely life. And I think that the reason that Zacchaeus was really looking for Jesus that day is that he was hoping that the rumors about Jesus were true. We know that during Jesus' ministry, there were a lot of things that were said about who he was and what he was there to do. And sometimes Jesus' own disciples didn't even understand what was going on. But like the rest of the Jewish people, Zacchaeus was waiting on the ultimate good news. They were waiting on a Messiah or a Savior, an anointed person from God who the Hebrew scriptures promised was coming to save the Jewish people. Last week, we talked about who Jesus is to us personally and how having a relationship with him can affect our life. But hindsight is 20/20, and it's easy for us because we have both the Old Testament and the New Testament to see why Jesus being that Savior, that Messiah, makes sense. But the need for a Messiah and the need for a Savior goes back way further than the story of Zacchaeus. It goes all the way back to the story of Adam and Eve. Ever since their sin, there's been a divide between God and all of humanity. And ever since that moment, God has been orchestrating the ultimate rescue mission to bring his people back to him and close that divide. He made a covenant with Abraham that his descendants would be God's chosen people. But the problem is that there was still sin in the world. Fast forward to Moses and the books of the law. Not just the 10 Commandments, but the things that we see in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They were very, very detailed and very, very specific. And they said that sin required a sacrifice to be forgiven. And that was true all the way up until the time that we meet Jesus. Even people during Jesus' time were going to the temple and making those sacrifices. But at the end of the Old Testament, we have these books called the prophets. And a prophet's job was to deliver a message to a group of people that was directly from God. It usually involved them having to turn from their sin and obeying God. And it called them out of their wrong living. But they also told of this coming Messiah. They said that the Messiah would be an anointed one or a king, that they would be a person of authority who would lead the people of Israel. And the book of Malachi is the last recorded prophet we have in the Old Testament. From that time on, it's believed that God didn't give any new words to the prophets until the time of John the Baptist's ministry in the New Testament. That means that the Jewish people didn't hear anything new from God for over 400 years. And that whole time, in those 400 years, they've been waiting for that Messiah to show up. And we often in the Bible see the Old Testament and the New Testament as very, very different. And sometimes it's easy to think that the Old Testament is less important because Jesus isn't born yet. The entire Old Testament points to Jesus as the Son of God, the Messiah, and the Savior of the world. So when Jesus shows up in the scene and he's doing his ministry, people start to make a lot of claims about who he was. And that really messed with the culture in that time, because the problem is that those people were listening to the words of the prophet, they were studying the scriptures, and they were still waiting for the Messiah. But Jesus didn't fit what they were looking for. They made a lot of assumptions about what the Messiah should look like. They thought he was going to be a big hero, a military leader, or a government official. But Jesus was born to a normal family, and he was a carpenter by trade. So he didn't fit the bill of what they were looking for, and it caused a lot of animosity and a lot of hostility during Jesus' time. However, looking back, we can see that Jesus fulfilled so many of those prophecies, and that gives us the ability to trust that he is going to fulfill the ones that we haven't seen happen yet. But let's get back to the story of Zacchaeus. We see that after that interaction, Zacchaeus promises Jesus to give away half of his money to the poor and also pay back 4 times what he scammed from people. We see a man who made his living off of cheating people want to freely give that money away. No one forced him to do it. Jesus never asked him to do it. That was Zacchaeus' genuine response to spending time with Jesus. In verses 9 and 10, we see Jesus' response. He tells Zacchaeus that day salvation has come to him, for the Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost. Thank you guys so much for letting me share. I miss seeing you in person. We're going to go into our small groups on Discord. We can't wait to hear what you have to say. Bye, guys.